Hey everyone, my name is Charles Austian, and today I will be discussing the topic of urban development and sustainability. But more importantly, I'll be discussing whether or not gentrification is a negative or can be considered an urban renewal plan. In this presentation, I will do the following. I will identify the problem in its context, and I'll provide two examples of the problem. I will analyze the ethical ramifications and considerations related to the problem. I will briefly discuss the relationship between the problem and existing policies that attempt to address the problem. And I'll also assess the effectiveness of the policies that I've identified. I will also describe how the problem can be improved with an ethical approach. And lastly, I will propose a new policy and apply an ethical approach to that said policy. So a lot of people may be asking themselves what the actual problem is. Why not bring in better quality products and services to an area without them? Why not bring more aesthetically pleasing houses to communities? Well, the simple answer is gentrification. Now, there are a few different definitions of gentrification, just depending on what context we're talking about. But the basic definition of gentrification is the process of renovating and improving a house or district so that it conforms to middle class taste. Now, that will be a problem to communities that have equality and social issues. They tend to not be very welcoming of redevelopment, which I'll talk a little more about that here in this presentation. Redevelopment often brings higher costing goods, services, and properties to the area. Higher costs tend to phase out individuals or families who cannot afford to live in that particular area, which can be tough because those are families that may have been in that area for generations. So that will definitely leave them feeling unheard and displaced. Now, I have two examples of the problem of gentrification. They both hit very close to home for me. So the first is the Cascades project in Tallahassee. I live in Tallahassee right now. I know a lot about this project. I know what it could do for the community and what it could do negative for the community. So I have a lot of stake in this project. And the next project is going to be the East Baltimore Redevelopment Project. And that's essentially a project headed by a group of churches to help redevelop a few communities within Baltimore. So there are two different projects with two different ways of going about redevelopment. So we'll get into those in a second. So the first redevelopment project that I'm going to be discussing is the Cascades project. Now, the Cascades project is considered Tallahassee's largest redevelopment project ever. The developer, who is North American Properties, set aside $158 million to complete the Cascades project. Now, the Cascades project is the site of the former Firestone and Bloxham Annex buildings, which are businesses, and they span 5 acres in two downtown city blocks. And there are also plans to build apartment complexes, townhouses, retail area, complete with restaurants and stores. There will be a gym and an upscale full-service AC hotel by the Marriott. And it's predicted to have an estimated $353.6 million economic impact for the area, especially amid global financial uncertainty due to coronavirus. So that is a very big element to this plan, and why it will continuously be pushed through. So here I've got two conceptual drawings as well as a current overhead shot of the project taking place. So if you look at the lower shot, um, the project is situated directly behind Cascades Park, which is Tallahassee's premier park for recreation and entertainment. As you can see, there's a giant amphitheater right there, um, which will drum up, plenty of business and things like that, which will also bring more business to the development that's right behind it. So the project itself and Cascades Park will definitely feed off each other a lot, and they're going to depend on each other. As I said previously, there are already businesses with higher costs popping up. So you want to go to these businesses and purchase these goods and services are going to cost more money. Um, it's already a bustling area, and it's just going to get more busy. So it's actually gonna, raise the market price and the property price around that area. So the second redevelopment project I'll be talking about is the East Baltimore redevelopment project. As I said before, I have quite a bit of stake in this project. I lived in the Baltimore area for a number of years as a teenager, and I still have a lot of friends I talk to and some family that lives in that area. So I understand the impact that this can have, both positively and negatively. So I'd like to give you just a little bit of background information. The redevelopment project was started in the early 2000s by 5 East Baltimore churches who came together with the common mission of improving their neighborhoods. At that time, the median household income was around $25,000 a year, with a median home price of about $12,000 a year. And over the last 15 years, the churches have amassed nearly 22 acres of property just with the Southern Baptist Church alone. And they're at the forefront of vacant property acquisition. And trust me, there's plenty of vacant lots and properties within Baltimore. And they total over 9 acres of acquisition in that realm. So if you check out some of these pictures I have 2 conceptual drawings of what they want this area to look like at the end of the project. And I've also got one recent photo that's been taken. As you can see, it doesn't necessarily look too bad. It looks like they've already done quite a bit of work since the early 2000s, looking really great. But there are areas that you can't see that are crime stricken and that are somewhat dilapidated still, just because they haven't had the care that they need to in terms of infrastructure development and things like that. So here I have 4 different elements that I believe you should take into consideration when looking at urban planning and redevelopment. So you should always look at the equity of that community and how it will be affected. So there will likely be social and financial inequities due to the higher cost of living that will come about from redevelopment. So essentially, some people will be able to adjust and others won't. The people who are able to adjust will likely stay, or they can stay. But the people who can't adjust likely will not have a choice in staying at all. And under equity, I've got infrastructure. So there may be costs associated with redeveloping certain aspects of the infrastructure, such as roads, lights and things like that. Once you get things that are better quality, the costs for that are going to go up, and the community is going to be taxed for that. So if that person is not able to deal with that extra taxation, they may indeed have to leave that area. The next part I've got is it may affect the assets and the amenities in the area. So because of the nature of amenities and the assets involved, they're subject to change. The way that they're both doled out and the quality of those amenities and assets. So there's going to be a shift in how those assets are provided as well as their cost. And the last and possibly most important is housing. How will housing be affected? So obviously the housing costs would likely increase in the event of urban redevelopment. So as I said before, those families that may have been in that area for generations may, be forced out of that area, sadly. And it's up to the developers, if that's in their mindset, to include the people who already live there so that they don't have to look for a new home to stay. So there are a few policies that are used to combat gentrification, some of which I will talk about in more detail later in the presentation. But there are social and financial inequalities already, and when you're introducing redevelopment of any kind, there's a chance that those inequalities can be exacerbated. So I've got 5 possible policies that can lessen the effect of gentrification. So the first one I've got is you can aggressively build middle income housing. Number 2, you can reduce or freeze property tax for that community. Number 3, you can protect senior homeowners and stakeholders. Number 4, you can prohibit large-scale industrial development in low-income neighborhoods. And number 5, you can create a fair housing rule and criteria that all businesses and the community itself have to abide by. So now that I've told you the different strategies that we can be used, I'm going to go into more detail with them. So first up, we've got you can aggressively build middle income housing. So by expanding on what community you live in now, um, housing can cost upwards to $300,000, maybe even more. And these houses require yearly incomes of at least $100,000 in order to actually purchase them. So the housing market of a community should closely correlate with the financial standing of its people. I've rated the effectiveness of this policy as moderate because this would work as long as there are developers willing to collaborate with the community, knowing that they may receive lower returns on profits. And this is a policy that's contingent on developers more so than a local government. So that's why I've rated that moderate. The second policy that can be implemented is the reduction or freezing of property tax. Now, this can help protect longtime residents of a community, especially at-risk neighborhoods where there are factors that affect development, such as crime or uh, just the property value itself. I've rated this as high effectiveness, and I've rated this because it's a policy that can be ironclad since it will be a local government action. The local government will have a stake in this action, so they're going to enforce it. And this is contingent on the local elected officials and their stake in the community. So it's important that you elect officials that have, your values in mind. So the third potential policy strategy that can be implemented would be the protection of senior homeowners and stakeholders. So this is very important for senior citizens, obviously, um, but it's really important for low to moderate income seniors, which are most seniors, being that they're not actually working at this point in time. Um, they may be unable to live in a specific area they've previously lived in because of rising property values. And I've rated this effectiveness as low because this would require the city and other stakeholders to collaborate and drastically increase the funding for existing senior programs such as home improvement programs and things like that. The policy itself is contingent on local elected officials and the advocacy of the community to support its seniors. Um, Now, I've rated this as low because there have to be several different elements that have to come together and collaborate effectively for this to actually work. And the chances of that happening aren't always high. So I've rated that policy as low. So the fourth element that I'd like to talk about is the possibility of prohibiting large-scale industrial development in low-income communities. Obviously, when more high-cost luxury development is brought into the community, that's going to displace a lot of the people there who cannot afford those goods and services. Since luxury homes come with so many services and amenities, the cost of living will be raised on those elements alone, not to mention the dozens of other possibilities. I've rated the effectiveness of this policy as low because there are, freedoms in the United States that we all are able to, capitalize on, such as freedom of enterprise. So there's not much that governments can do about that because it's actually a right of us as long as we're not breaking any actual laws. And this is something that the community would have to agree on as a whole and advocate. You can't be a few people pushing for these high cost luxury developments to stay out. It has to be a community thing. So you need to have community values that point in the same direction for that to work. So, as I said before, that would be a low effective policy. So, the fifth and final possible policy that could be implemented to combat gentrification and displacement would be to create fair housing rules and criteria. Now, this can be done by the federal government through their resources, um, and they would use this to benefit disproportionately at-risk neighborhoods. Uh, Traditional fair housing policies can discourage equitable investment. So, I've essentially rated this as high because